Greetings and welcome to the 49th episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases. As always, I'm your host Dark Elf Guy, and today we have another 13 mods for your viewing pleasure with an overall random theme. But before we get to all that, real quick, I would just like to announce that we're on the eve of the Morrowind May Modathon month, celebrating Morrowind's 14th birthday. Just like last year, this is a modding competition where you can make mods and win prizes, and we've joined up with Nexus Mods, Great House Ligety, and the Assimilation Lab as participating mod hosting sites. Now, there'll be more details about Morrowind Modathon in tomorrow's announcement video, but all the same, I want to say happy 14th anniversary Morrowind, may the best games never die. Now, why don't we get on with our 49th episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases? As always, all download links can be found in the video description below, so let's get started with our popular mod of the week. Which this week is Resdayn Revival mod series, Melkor's Mudcrab Merchants by Melkor Doc and the Resdayn Revival team. And this mod is basically an overhaul of the island where the famed Mudcrab Merchant sort of lives, and giving it a bit more unique character to make it easily visible amongst the dozens of isles of the Azura's coast region. You'll now find some really neat landscaping here, with some cool arches and gardens, and a scattering of crates and barrels. And of course the Mudcrab Merchant himself has been given a complete makeover. No longer does he look like just, every other mudcrab on the block. Now he has his little aristocratic pipe sitting atop a raised platform from which he holds court on the prices for your numerous goods, so to speak. And this is just a sort of fun cosmetic mod that really just makes it easier to find this otherwise notoriously difficult to spot Mudcrab Merchant, and it really gives him a bit of character and charm as well. Now for our house mod of the week this week, we have Balmora Stronghold Home by Laz, and this mod adds a new player home to the outskirts of Balmora, right next to the temple here on the northern end of the city, and it really has a sort of interesting design on the exterior that's really just kind of unique, with a sort of covered balcony and a few gardens, and there's also a decent number of banners to give the exterior here some extra visual flair. On the interior side of things, you'll find a fairly large abode done up in the Velothian architectural style, with an entry hall here that has a roaring fireplace in the center, with some display cases and cozy cushions for seating around the fire. And you'll find just off to the side here a sort of library-like room with lots of bookshelves, a few display tables, and a lot of books naturally. And you may notice that the frame rate is a little heavy in here. Most of the mana is part of one big interior cell, so it may be just slightly draining on lower end, middle end systems. And this is just especially draining if you're using MGSO or per pixel lighting. But anyway, we just saw one of the main display halls, and down below here you'll find a really lovely pool-like area with some atmospheric gardens to the side, and you also find a small guest bedroom that any companions you have can use. And going back to the entry hall, you'll find another room off to the side here containing a bar and a sort of kitchen-like space with a dining room attached. And of course the interior is just really well finished with a lot of detailing, and I have to say it really is a very lovely home. Naturally there's also a master bedroom, which is sort of a large chamber that includes a personal bath-like space that you can see here, and the bed itself overlooks the bath with the waterfalls, and really it's a pretty cool looking design, a bit different from what you typically expect to find in a house mod. Now there's also a massive display hall in the basement, and this is probably my favorite room in the entire house. It just has a fantastic sort of color scheme with the lighting, and with mezzanines overlooking the display hall down below, which just sort of lends an air of verticality to the room. And the centerpiece here is a lovely set of fountains, and the room is just bordered by a number of really nice looking gardens. And of course the main function of this room is to serve as a display hall, and it accomplishes this quite well with dozens of display cases, bookshelves, and more than a few chests to store your items in. It really is a massive and lovely abode that's well worth a look if you want a home in the Balmora area. This week's gameplay mod of the week is Both Signs Are More Fun by Alicia Guy, and I do apologise if I mispronounced that. This is a mod that's pretty similar to another mod we covered a long time ago, Races Are More Fun, by the same author. And basically what it does is add new abilities and powers to each of the birth signs that you can choose from to start out with in the game. And a lot of these birth signs have been given pretty major overhauls, like the Mage, which in Vanilla Morrowind was honestly a pretty lame birth sign, only modifying your magicka by a small amount, but now it comes with a full range of abilities and powers to choose from. Likewise, nearly every birth sign now has about 3 to 4 powers and abilities each, some of which are powers that were taken from the Oblivion version of these birth signs, and others are brand new. In any event, these new abilities really do make both signs a bit more interesting and make them especially more important for role-playing purposes. For example, the Apprentice now has 3 new powers associated with it: the Artisan, Gates of Aetherius, and Void Seed, each of which can be used to boost your magical abilities in a particular area, like one boosts intelligence when you cast it, another boosts your enchanting power, and so on and so forth. These are extremely useful powers to have, and even though they're only temporary and you can only cast them once a day, they can be essential for helping with a difficult situation, especially at the beginning of the game. There's also a number of birth signs with really interesting powers, like the Atronach, which now comes with a power that includes levitation, but at the cost of your health. This is extremely useful for starting players because levitation is something that you don't get reliable access to, at least not until practically mid-game, but with the damage to your health it does mean there's a bit of a trade-off here. Still, it's a really handy power to have, and the levitation lasts an entire 2 minutes, allowing you to make a quick escape from enemies or reach places you normally couldn't get to. And another interesting birth sign is the Steed, which gives you the powers to mark and recall, but at a cost to your health and fatigue. This is another extremely useful set of spells that normally one can't get until later on, but here you can start out with it, and being able to mark and teleport back at any time is really quite convenient. But again, there's a trade-off, just like with most of these birth signs, and in any event, this is a really fun mod to add a bit more spice to your game, and really great for role players especially, since it gives you the ability to start out with a variety of different powers that you normally wouldn't be able to. Next up we have our Dungeon Roll of the Week, and this week we have Greater Adamastartes by Tunnel Architect. And I know most of you are probably already familiar with Adamastartes, the Smuggler Cave right across from the Siltstreiter in Sedanine. And what this mod does is basically completely overhauls it. Now, instead of smugglers, you'll find the caverns have been infested with giant rats, and a lot of the atmosphere and design of the cavern has been changed as well. Now it's a sort of darker lighting setting with a lot more rocks and boulders populating the passageways, and not only that, but there's also a bit more loot in this version of the Smuggler Cave, with a lot more random barrels and crates scattered around. And a lot of them have weapons and armor in them, nothing too overpowered, mostly iron, steel, and chitin stuff. But these are items that can be pretty useful for starting characters especially. And indeed, giant rats are a little bit easier to handle than the original smugglers as well. There's also been a slight expansion to the caverns with some new, rather interesting looking enemies for you to face. I believe they're called owlbears. Certainly kind of a little menacing looking. And they're protecting the entrance to a Dwemer ruin that can now be found on the lower level. And I don't want to show off too much here, since dungeons are all about exploration and it's no fun to have that experience spoiled for you. But I will show you off the first part of these Dwemer ruins here, and they expand the further down you go, and it's just a sort of interesting little expansion to a rather iconic Smuggler Cave in Morrowind, giving you just a little bit of extra content to explore. And for our items of the week this week, we have Certain Horian Armor, Morrowind Edition by Anne Dragon, and Converted by Bahamut. And with this mod, you'll now find a new set of armor for sale in the Tower of Dusk at Ghostgate, being sold by this fellow here. And this is a new light armor with fairly comparable armor ratings to glass armor, and it's also really quite pricey, as you might expect. And you can see this armor here, and just like all the other converted armors from the later games, this one is just quite exquisitely detailed, clearly very high resolution with a lot of fine flourishes and the like. And it's kind of a cloth-like armor with a lot of cool designs and patterns, and I especially like the look of the shield here. It's a kind of an interesting shape, sort of like a fan or a seashell. And the armor itself does include 2 different helms, including this one helm here, which is a more traditional type of helm with a few spikes along the top. And there's also a version that includes a hood for when you just want to hide your face, and the armor set also includes 2 different pairs of greaves, as well as support for the beast races with special boots and gloves that can be worn by Khajiits and Argonians. And really, this is just a great armor set for thieves or assassin-like characters. I imagine that with this dark cloth, you'd be able to blend in with the shadows quite well and sneak around, especially at night time or in dark caverns or things like that. And it's just a really cool looking armor set too. You can just imagine that this would be fantastic to wear to a Thieves Guild meeting or something of that nature. This week's quest mod of the week is Olahin by Petrograd. And this mod basically starts out when you meet a Red Guard noble in Saran who has news about your father, a father you've never met, it should be added, and more specifically with news that your father has been kidnapped by a strange and mysterious anti-imperial organization hiding out on Voddenfell. And this will start you out on a long series of quests to find out more about this mysterious group, gathering information from random people you meet across all of Voddenfell, and delving through a few new books that you might encounter in one library or another. And eventually you'll uncover enough information to truly embark on your quest to find this secretive group who apparently live in an ancient Dwemer city forgotten by the rest of Tamriel. There's a fair bit of dialogue and, conflicting information about Ulahin, some suggesting that he's the head of a death-obsessed cult, others calling him a revolutionary prophet who will finally bring peace to Tamriel after toppling the Empire, of course. And this is indeed an epic series of quests where you'll be forced to choose sides and consider your actions. Now, to even get to the ancient city where Ulahin holds court, you'll have to go through a number of trials and puzzles and survive a handful of dungeon-like rooms, as well as read a few books with thoughtful warnings of greed and temptation, and, the usual stuff. Of course, many of these puzzles do carry the penalty of failure, and you'll have to gather quite a few different items from these various trial rooms to even get access to Ulahin. Of course, when I say failure, I actually mean that many of these puzzles carry the penalty of death, so you need to remember to save often with this quest mod, lest you find yourself going back to a much older save game, and many of these trials require you to play something of a pacifist, which means no killing of creatures, just running in, grabbing what you need, and then very quickly departing. And eventually you'll reach the ancient Dwemer city of Caer, a massive underground city of mixed Dwemer and Velothian architecture, with several districts, including a commercial district. And, even though this is a group of cultist rebels, and they're working outside of imperial law and all that, they still seem to be maintaining a civilized city where you can roam the streets safely and visit any of a dozen shops and taverns. And naturally, there's a little bit of sprinkled new dialogue as well, but this is a mod you sort of gradually progress in with some 44 new quests for you to do that are doled out over time, and not all at once. The author actually recommends starting this mod at level 1, which might be a little too early for some of the more complicated puzzle challenges, but for the information gathering stage, that makes a lot of sense. And in any event, this is clearly one massive quest mod with an absolute ton of content to check out, and a number of mysteries to be discovered and solved gradually over time. There's even a new companion that you can get along your journeys, and much more for you to see and do than we can possibly ever cover in a showcase like this. So if you're looking for another epic quest adventure mod, I really recommend checking out Ulahin. And of course, there's no such thing as having too many quest mods, so I do highly recommend checking it out. And next up is our Landmass Mod of the week, and this week we have Winds of Shurgorad, a landscape overhaul by Carrot Ferret. And I know this isn't actually a landmass mod in the traditional sense, but it is rather a massive and complete overhaul of the Shurgorad region of northern Voddenfell, giving it a completely new climate and unique character, rather than the sort of copied Azura's Coast environments it had before in vanilla Morrowind. Notably, the town of Dagonfell has been overhauled, and this is actually the third or fourth major overhaul of Dagonfell in the last 6 months. No longer a village with shacks, Dagonfell is now a proper town of Nordic dwellings, with traditional Nordic imperial huts and houses lining Dagonfell's streets, and yes, all of these houses have seen their interiors updated to reflect these changes, as you might expect, and as you can see here. And basically, Winds of Shurgorad changes the Shurgorad landscape to be more like Solstheim, since they're about at an equal distance north. But this is a rather unique take on the Solstheim-ified Shurgorad region idea, since this has been done in other mods, and instead of a straight copying Solstheim's landscape from the Shurgorad region, Winds of Shurgorad sort of does a blending, keeping some elements of vanilla Shurgorad while adding in a lot of features that you might find in southern Solstheim, like pine tree forests or ancient Nordic ruins and outcroppings, left after centuries of Nordic invasions of northern Morrowind and Voddenfell, making for a truly interesting landscape with new things to discover. Though the famed mushroom forests of vanilla Morrowind are gone, they've been replaced with rather extensive pine tree forests and valleys that have their own little secrets to hide and to discover should you explore them. You'll also find a variety of Solstheim-like plants, but also many native Vvardenfell flowers and even occasional mushrooms in these woodlands, along with the same wildlife that you can find all over Vvardenfell, with cliff races and Nixhound still playing an important part in Sheogorad's ecology. And another feature of this mod is that it includes a number of new landmarks and dungeons where you find, I believe there's 3 new dungeons in total, including 2 Imperial-style dungeons and a second Dwemer ruin located somewhere in the wide coastal areas of Sheogorad. And in particular, with the Imperial dungeons, you'll find a ruined keep, an old Imperial outpost that used to be manned for keeping watch on Morrowind's northern shipping lanes prior to the opening up of Vvardenfell in 3E 4-17. And, you know, I just got to say that I really love how much detail there is in this overhaul. This wasn't some quick texture applying job. The author really put a lot of thought into this, not only updating the land textures, but populating the environment with beautiful forests and woodland areas and providing some scenic landmarks. And another thing to note here is that the Sheogorad itself is home to a multitude of climates, with much of the islands featuring a similar landscape to southern Solstheim, but the northern area of the Sheogorad region is actually snow-covered with ice caps and ancient broken-down longboats from past invasions. It's a sort of interesting change from the rest of the islands, and helps give the Sheogorad some extra unique character as they land between Vvardenfell and Solstheim in appearance. And here you can see some of the traditional Dwemer ruins that are so iconic in the Dagonfell area, with this new Solstheim-like environment, and I think it provides a really great contrast with these ancient Dwemer towers sticking up out amongst the pine trees. It really is quite visually intriguing to see. And real quick, I wanted to show off the interior of one of these dungeons. Here you can see the Imperial Keep, and there's not a whole lot of hostels in here, at least not at first, and in many of these new dungeons you can find various documents and flavor text scattered about that give you a bit of information about the background and history of these locations. And all in all, Winds of Sheogorad provides a fantastically unique experience and interpretation of Vvardenfell's northernmost region, and it's certainly well worth checking out if you're in the mood for something just a little bit different from what you can typically expect to find in this area. For our NPC Mod of the Week this week, we have Endemica of Vvardenfell by Tidy, and this is actually a set of 4 different mods that were made separately that act as texture and model replaces for the various reptile-like creatures of Morrowind, including Gwars, Kaguti, Elits, and Cliff Racers. You can see the Gwar texture replacer here, and it's a bit of a darker colouring than what you'll find in Vanilla Morrowind, more of a darkish tan than the sort of pinkish tan in Vanilla Morrowind, and these are fairly highly detailed with high resolution texture replacers that really help to emphasize the various aspects and details of Morrowind's most popular creature. And in particular, I think the bumps going up and down the back of these walls are a new addition by this texture replacer. And moving on, next up we have the Elites, the sort of basically giant mouth creatures that amble along in their on the sort of bipedal legs, seemingly without eyes or really anything besides those gaping maws they bite you with. And regardless of how strange Elites are, you can really make out a lot of rich details with this replacer, particularly with the sort of reptilian skin they have, and again the colouring here is just a little bit darker than Vanilla Morrowind. And next up we're looking at the Kaguti, which again has some really nice high resolution textures applied to them that really enhance the reptilian features like the underbelly, scales, and there's also a lot of other cool details to make out here, like the red, almost menacing eyes, or their tusks, ready to gouge you at a moment's notice, or, you know, their horns or teeth, or any of a number of other aggressive physical traits they possess. I mean, the Kaguti are definitely a predator. And finally, we have the Cliff Racer, and I know that we've already covered Peter Bit's fantastic Cliff Racer replacer in the past, and I really like Tidy's version here as well. Once again, you can see that the wings here have a nice translucent effect on them, where you can see the sky and landmarks behind them, and these are obviously pretty high quality textures in use, much like with most of Tidy's stuff. And overall, these are just some pretty cool looking Cliff Racers, and really all these mods are well worth checking out, especially the ones for the Kaguti, Elites, and Gwars, because there's not really a whole lot of replacers around for those creatures in particular, and they provide some much needed great options for you to choose from. This week's new meshes and textures mod of the week is Long Live the Plates retexture by Anarchia, And this is a text replacer mod for the various common plates you see cluttering the dining halls, taverns, and homes of Morrowind, providing 8 new textures that cover the 8 different types of common plates found in vanilla Morrowind. You can get a detailed look at these plates with these new textures applied here. And they really are quite beautiful. You can make out a ton of detail with each of these plates with what are clearly high resolution textures applied to them. And they also look like plates you might expect to find in an older civilization with tons of interesting patterns. Like you can sort of make out a horse on one of these plates, but it's in an incomplete state with the head missing. Other designs include some flower-like patterns and some repeated crossing and double crossing of lines. A few of the patterns here even look a bit like stained glass, and needless to say, they all look quite beautiful. I certainly wouldn't mind having a few of these on display in my own home. And they're just really quite decorative, and in any event, if you enjoy collecting plates or just admiring them as part of the environment, you'll definitely want to give this replacer a try. It's really high quality and just fantastic looking plate textures that just add a little bit of extra life to the game and a little bit more detail to the environment. Next up we have our Modest Resource Mod of the Week, and this week we have Daedric Resources by PK Chuno. And as you might expect from the name of this mod, this is a collection of Daedric resources, namely Daedric furniture related items like Daedric tables and bookshelves, as well as a number of other objects that you can see here in a demo file provided by the resource author. And this is really an extremely useful resource because in vanilla Morrowind there really just isn't a whole lot of Daedric related furnishings or items you can use to clutter up Daedric ruins, and there's just a ton of stuff included in this resource file, such as Daedric benches, altars, barrels, multiple different kinds of bookshelves, round tables, crates, urns, chests, and much more. It's really a great resource for creating a Daedric themed house mod as well, and since I can just imagine using a lot of these for crafting large Daedric manors and the like. There's also some Oblivion related resources like an Oblivion Gate, and there's also sigil stones included in this file, so if you wanted to make a gateway into Oblivion or something of that nature, this would be a great resource for that. And all in all, these are just some great thematic resources for any Daedric related mods that you might want to build. For our underrated mod of the week this week, we have Shaki Manor by Dark Toby. And this is a fairly simple house mod that adds a shack-styled home just south of Hla Ode, sort of along the road as you can see here. And it's a fairly large construction consisting of 3 or 4 shacks sort of put together, with a bit of a dock with a rowboat moored nearby, and a small hammock overlooking the bitter cave so you can just sort of, relax and take in the view as the sun sets over the ocean. And inside is a fairly quaint shacky abode with a first floor that contains a small cooking pit, along with some storage and a small dining area. And there's also a little bit of a story here telling you what happened to the previous owner, who apparently worshipped the 6th house. And on the 2nd floor you'll find a small bedroom with a small desk space, as well as a little bit of storage for keeping your personal possessions. And you'll notice this house is built along several levels, including a couple of small caverns located beneath the shack itself. This includes a bit of a storage cavern with lots of crates and barrels, and also some friendly mice to keep you company, as well as a sort of magical-like lab section and a roaring fire. And below you'll find another cavern including a bedroll and a few storage containers, and presumably you could keep a prisoner down here if you so desire, or just use it as a guest room for a companion or something of that nature. And moving on, this week's Blast from the Past mod of the week is The Blind Heretic by Daggeth Jeff. And this is a pretty interesting mod that adds a unique little tavern and club on the edge of the Cedar run by Ariel's sort of misguided brother. And right away you can tell that this is a just sort of beautifully detailed mod, and in many ways it's basically a sort of ambience and atmosphere mod, because there's no new dialogue here or quests or anything of that nature. There is a small dungeon, which we'll get to later, but mostly it's just a cool place to come across and just sort of hang out, with lots of little secrets here and there for you to discover. And I mean, just the dock design here is just really cool looking, with a lot of clutter and a few things to be discovered. Now, as you might imagine, that same level of detail found on the exterior can also be found on the interior, with a sort of tavern-like atmosphere and design going on with the upper levels, including a merchant who can sell you food and booze, and you just gotta stop and admire the level of detail in here and the many creative uses of furniture and items. This is just one really cool looking tavern, though it isn't just a tavern. On the top level here, you sort of have a gentleman's club. Obviously, Ariel's brother isn't quite as upstanding a citizen as his brother. And you also find a lot of flavor text documents that sort of highlight that all over the Blind Heretic, which is another cool aspect of this mod for you to just sort of discover on your own. And on the first floor, you'll find Ariel's brother himself, who's manning the sort of traditional tavern-like part of the Blind Heretic, and he has a number of different items to sell, and about 3,000 bartering gold, which isn't too bad. And as I mentioned before, there's a small dungeon located underneath the tavern, and to get down here, you're going to have to go through a number of locks. And I often wish that Daggeth Jeff had made a few more content mods. These interiors are just fantastically detailed, but alas, this is the only one he made. And regardless though, this is just a really fun atmosphere mod of a small but cool dungeon for you to discover. And if you just appreciate really detailed locations, you should definitely give this one a go. It provides a very unique experience and an excellent location to just sort of visit and explore in between your adventures. And finally, for our bonus mod of the week this week, we have Ashmire by R0. Now, this is sort of another fun immersion and atmosphere mod that adds a cool location for you to discover called the Ashmire, out on in the sort of northern Ashland region. This is sort of an ashy bog that's taken over part of this old Foidia here, and it's a very unique and cool looking location with trauma roots surrounding the edges here to give it a bit of a menacing vibe, and there's just a ton of things slowly sinking into the bog here, like the remains of a long dead Silt Strider and the corpses of long lost adventurers, and even a few mummies, which I don't know how mummies got here. I guess maybe there was an ancestral tomb here at one point that just sort of sunk into the bog. Or quite possibly there's just something else hidden beneath the murk and ash. Regardless, this is just a fun and very atmospheric mod to sort of discover when you're out exploring, with a few little secrets to be discovered. And of course, it's a great place to just sort of relax and take an ash bath if you prefer, if that's your sort of thing. And that pretty much wraps up all the mods I had to show you guys this week. Tune in next week for our 50th anniversary episode. And of course, the Morrowind Moddathon month will be going on throughout this entire month of May. So don't forget to go out and get your mod on, and you could win a ton of prizes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.